Managing a general election is a mammoth undertaking. New voters have to be registered. Old voting lists have to be updated and checked. Ballots have to be designed and printed. The right ink has to be bought. Polling stations have to be arranged. Nomination papers have to be checked. Absolute integrity of process and security of materials have to be assured. All this and more before a single ballot can be dropped into a box and an index finger dipped in red ink. Imagine then the scale of the challenge in managing a country's very first general election. Absolutely everything has to be done from scratch. And what does not exist simply has to be invented. Years ago, in 1946, Trinidad and Tobago prepared to hold its first general election under universal adult suffrage. Until then, only 6% or so of high-income property owners were allowed to vote. But finally, after decades of social upheaval and insistent demand for representation, every adult, 21 years and over, was granted the right to vote. Within the space of 9 short months, election authorities had to pull off Trinidad and Tobago's first election under universal adult suffrage.
There would have been challenges, a new experience, first election under universal adult suffrage, to register voters and prepare the list of electors and manage the whole cycle of the election process. Indeed, would have been a challenge at that time.
The man with the Herculean task of planning and executing Trinidad and Tobago's historic election was Theodore Francis Farrell, a public servant who was appointed supervisor of elections just 2.5 months before the general election on July 1st. To advise and guide the process, a consultant was brought in from Canada. A.J. Pelletier, a retired census officer with the Canadian government, was the architect of the election plan executed by Farrell. In less than a year, the entire election was planned and implemented. From October 1945 to Election Day, July 1st, 1946. First, 2 new constituencies were created, increasing the number of electoral districts from 7 to 9. Port of Spain was divided into North Port of Spain and South Port of Spain, while in South Trinidad, a new constituency of San Fernando was brought onto the electoral map. In his report on the 1946 election, T.F. Farrell describes the experience in great detail. Some elements, such as the design of the ballot box and symbols, were borrowed from Jamaica, which 2 years before, in 1944, had become the first British West Indian colony to embrace universal adult suffrage. Here are some memorable statistics from the historic election of 1946. A total of 259,512 names were registered, most being first-time voters. Using the much slower technology of the time, 719 voters lists were printed round the clock over a period of 5 weeks. The total cost of the election was around $86,700, most of which was spent on paying enumerators and on printing. Using a design borrowed from Jamaica, 757 ballot boxes were built from plywood, with locks and keys imported from Britain. 703 polling station locations were identified and set up. There was a massive public education effort to get the population quickly up to speed on the voting process. An election supplement was published in the Trinidad Guardian, along with several articles and columns in the Port of Spain Gazette. A film titled "To Vote is a Great Duty" was produced and shown to packed audiences in cinemas and venues throughout Trinidad and Tobago. The supervisor of elections himself went from village to village with a loudspeaker, urging people to vote and handing out information pamphlets. At the end, the voter turnout was 52.9%. respectable enough for a people's first tentative step towards democracy.
I think it was an excellent voter turnout, considering all the challenges. Literacy wasn't very high. You had challenges of communication. 9 electoral districts. I think it was around 703 polling stations. And considering those factors, it would have been considered a high voter turnout.
Among the legacies of the 1946 general election which have endured to this day are the ban on the sale of alcohol and campaigning on Election Day.